So we are now headed into our QA panel for the morning sessions. We'll have 7 of our speakers from this morning come on stage. Those are Vamsi, Adam, James, Heather, Gil, Brian, and Lisa. If you could please come up to the stage. While they're coming up, a couple of notes. Again, there are microphones in both of the aisles. We love in-person questions, so if you have any, please line up by the microphones. Also note that we do not have room on stage for all of this morning's speakers. So everyone's talks were great. We appreciated them. If we have questions for speakers that we couldn't fit on stage, we'll do our best to get them answered. I think looks like we have almost everybody. We probably have enough for us to get started. And I'll have a seat. I will, first of all, I think, thank all of the speakers this morning for their talks and also their great work. You know, we certainly recognize that in order for AMP to be a success, it needs to be good for developers, it needs to be good for consumers, but it also really critically needs to be good for business. And so that's what we'll talk about for a few more minutes. All right? So I'll begin with a question from the audience. This was actually one of the most upvoted questions that we received, and it's not a code question. It is actually a question about influencing key stakeholders to buy into AMP, whether that be to simply support experimental efforts around AMP or to commit to building entire websites or products around AMP. So I'll give the specific question, but then I'll also ask anyone on the panel who'd like to answer it in a more general sense. So the specific question is, as developers, we have little or no control over whether the ads we sell use AMP for ads. How do we convince our ad sales department about AMP for ads? Now, again, I feel like some of the stats that we saw earlier, 30% increases in click-through, 30% increases in revenue, were all very compelling. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from anyone who's willing to talk about, again, it doesn't necessarily have to be about AMP for ads, but any of these efforts where you have to influence an internal or external stakeholder to buy in.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is that you're probably hearing from your ad sales department already about viewability. And so viewability is really important now to brands. It's how they're buying a lot of their campaigns, and that's how long or an ad is in view for a user. And one of the problems that you can see on AMP pages is that AMP pages load so quick, and if they're using just traditional ads, those ads will actually load, and the person's already scrolled past the ad. And so you actually see really low viewability. So for salespeople, when they're actually going to sell to a brand, they can promote using AMP HTML ads because it will increase the viewability. And so it's something brands really do care about and the buyers really do care about. So I think there's a little bit of like education on that side. And that's something we could put together like a quick PDF that like kind of shows that, and something you could send to your sales team to show that like if you do this, like your brands will see more viewability, which means they'll spend more money, which means that sales guy gets more money in his pocket, which is the way to motivate salespeople.
From a publisher perspective, it's a little bit dangerous to turn away creatives. And ultimately, as a publisher, we sometimes just have to work with whatever we're supplied with, specifically around direct advertising. So if the agency turns around and says, I've got this really heavy asset, then it's difficult for us to say, no, I'm not going to run that. But ultimately, with some of the standardization of that we saw today within GWD, which makes it easier for the people actually building the creatives to understand, is this an AMP HTML ad and all sorts of different stuff. Ultimately, if that's the sort of assets that they're passing across to us, then we can definitely use them. But I think that there is still a bit of a disconnect between the expectation of the end brand and what they're trying to do, if that makes sense.
I'll just add one thing. Revenue solves all problems. So in this particular case, you saw pretty incredible stats around revenue. But even it just makes sense from just a logical standpoint, right? You can only probably click on an ad if the ad is in the viewport and is loaded in time. And the ad's not fast, you can't click on it, and as James mentioned, you can't have better viewability. And that's what we're trying to get at. And I think it's a better sort of from a user experience standpoint, but also it has to be better from a revenue standpoint in order to make this work. So I would urge you to kind of point to this talk and kind of show the benefits you get from revenue just by switching over to AMP HTML ads.
Right, and having them be backward compatible helps as well in terms of, it's better not to have to create yet another additional format, right?
Absolutely.
Good, good. I think we have 1 or 2 audience questions.
Yeah. It's a small question about forms. I would like to ask to the Airbnb people about the search form. They said that they use the AMP on the search page. And I'm curious because when I've been trying to use AMP on forms, I have found some issues that were well explained by the Instapages people in the last session. And I would like to know how, if Airbnb has found these validation issues and UX issues with the material design rendering eventually, if you ever tried, if you ever found this kind of issues. Okay?
Yeah, so I guess this is to reset the question just regarding our forms and whether or not we found it successful. Kind of hard to say because it's been pretty difficult to actually A/B test the different forms that we use. So a lot of it's surrounding the date picker. So right now, I think if you go on any of our AMP pages, we're using a slightly suboptimal date picker that defaults to the iOS forms that we submit. And right now, we are working with Google in order to create, I guess, a more immersive date picker in order just to provide a better experience. I think we have a slight advantage in that they actually create the date picker based on the Airbnb React date picker. So integration, we did a really quick and dirty implementation, and it didn't seem to be that difficult to do. But in regards to whether or not it's better or it's worse, we don't have enough data to say. Sorry.
Thank you. We have a question?
I'm working for an advertiser company, and what I heard about AMP HTML ads sounds very interesting. But I have some questions concerning the problems or the concerns a customer from us would have, because they want to make sure everything which they paid for would have been seen. So they want to have their own tracking system. So is there a way to add third-party tracking in AMP HTML ads?
Yeah, I mean, I think in either method, so either the way we do it or the regular AMP HTML, you could definitely add additional third-party tracking, and you can do that in a couple ways. You can do just a third-party tracking pixel that would call back to them like a traditional kind of pixel, or you can do the mode analytics and things like that. For a lot of advertisers want to use mode or something else to verify viewability and things like that. That's all supported through AMP Analytics. So you can definitely do either way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And another audience question?
Yeah, this is the same thing about Google Web Designer. So if we design the ads on Google Web Designer and it's AMP validated, do we still need a special key for the ads to be served?
Yes, they would still need to be signed for serving.
Even if we go through Google AdWords, so we download it to the local folder and then we upload them into Google AdWords, we still need to have a special key. And how would I go through that?
Yeah, so if you're just using Google AdWords, Google is a signer, and Google will just sign them before delivering them. So I'll just introspect to see if it's an AMP HTML ad, it'll just sign it and deliver it. The server-side signing model that I described in my talk is what happens there.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I have one more question about viewability. So as a publisher, we moved to selling only the viewable ads. And Adam, maybe you could share some data on how viewability changes when we implement AMP.
I don't have exact stats with me right now, but if you're talking about just AMP pages, viewability is through the roof compared to non-AMP pages. We also give the ability, sort of configuration options to publishers, where you can do things like, okay, how quickly do I want to lazy load a certain ad on an AMP page? And you can basically start to tweak those things depending on sort of your needs and how much sort of, obviously, advertisers are advertising with you based on the general viewability percentages. So you can, it's basically configurable. It's much more.
So technically, you're talking about fast fetch, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool.
Good. Thank you. Good. So I'll turn to a couple more questions that we got through the questions site. There are a couple related questions about building e-commerce experiences. So I'll read them both and then feel free to address in whatever order you like. So the first question is, what is the investment required in terms of time and resources in building a fully functional AMP website from scratch, which replicates a full funnel e-commerce experience? Okay, and then the second one, which I'll just add on, is really about maintenance. And so there are questions about, in terms of comparing the maintenance and support of an AMP e-commerce experience to a non or prior e-commerce experience. So again, I'll let Lisa start, then anyone else can join in.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that it really ranges, and I think that you maybe got that impression today as well, where AliExpress was able to build the bulk of their site in canonical AMP in 2 months, whereas Airbnb, they have a lot of existing infrastructure that needed to adapt in order to use AMP, and that's taken them much longer, right? So it really depends on sort of what tools you're currently using, what the state of your site currently is, as to how long it would take to build a revamped version. I will say that the AMP team is happy to work with you through that process and to help decrease frictions where we can and really work with you through that. And we are trying to make it easier for all sites, and not just the AliExpresses of the world, but really for all sites to build e-commerce experiences easily. The second part of the question.
The second part of the question was really about ongoing maintenance and support. What are the comparisons or trade-offs of maintaining an AMP e-commerce experience versus non-AMP or whatever prior framework existed before?
Right. So from the performance standpoint, I think that if you are optimizing speed on your own, you are constantly going to have to make sure that you're keeping the site performance high, right? As you're adding new features, as you're changing your pages, this is something that's always going to be on your plate, right? With AMP, you don't have to worry about that anymore. As long as your pages validate, I think that Michael put this really well, it's binary, right? If they validate, they're going to be fast. If they don't validate, then you probably need to fix those errors, but once you do, then those pages will be fast. You don't need to worry about maintaining the site performance. In terms of relying on the AMP library, we obviously make it a priority not to unintentionally break anything as we are shipping new features. I think that this was one of the OKRs that we had, and it was shared yesterday in the keynote, and the what's next is something that we're continuing to prioritize. Of course, as you see things change, let us know, but that's definitely a priority for us.
Good. Anyone else want to take that one before I move on to the next?
So in terms of how long it takes to get set up, I think Airbnb is reaching its 1-year anniversary for when we started working on AMP. So the hard part was the infrastructure was difficult, as you may have guessed from what Gil was talking about. But really the difficult part was, one, convincing leadership that it's worth it, and two, actually dialing down your experimentation, your logging. Because for us, getting all the AMP impressions into our core data infrastructure, we're still working on it. We don't have a timeline, just because there's so much work that needs to be done to get AMP data into core data so that the rest of leadership can see it. So I think it really depends on where you're working and the existing infrastructure that you have set up.
Good, thank you. Let's see, any more audience questions? All right, I'll go to another couple questions from the site. This will go to probably Vamsi, some questions about AMP stories and ads, which may have been addressed earlier today, but the particular questions, what ad formats will be supported by AMP stories? Traditional ads won't cut it, and there needs to be a richer format for them as well. And then related question, is there a timeline for ad support in AMP stories, and specifically DFP support?
So yes, I agree that regular ads just won't cut it for AMP stories. So we are working on, as you saw in the deck, a few different formats, primarily two, the ability to sort of make it look very native. So it shouldn't be a sort of different experience. So you should be able to sort of tap away right after you hit an ad, just like you would tap away if you don't like the current organic story page that you're looking at. So that's one format. But there's some really cool experiences that are possible where you build the entire ad inside of a story itself. So it's a story within a story. So being able to kind of go into the story and kind of tell, especially for publishers, sponsored content is evolving as an advertising format, and they could use stories to do that. It's going to be phased. We don't have exact timelines, but one thing I want to say is, want to ensure whatever advertising model we build is based on top of the existing AMP HTML infrastructure. And Also, we want not just DoubleClick, but every single ad network to participate in that. Just like how regular AMP ads have close to 100 ad networks participating, we'd like sort of a similar sort of adoption in the stories case as well. So we are working with the DoubleClick team. No specific timelines, but we'll announce that soon.
To follow up on that, yeah, I know that there have been a handful of publishers who've worked on piloting and developing stories. Have those publishers also, to your knowledge, been working on figuring out how they bring advertising into those stories, or is that kind of next phase for them?
Yeah, they've initially started to experiment, but to be honest, it's a really, really early format. We don't know how it's going to be consumed on the mobile web. So I think publishers have been pretty patient in trying to just focus on innovating and building a great product, and then sort of focusing on monetization sort of quickly after. But yeah, we've been having some early conversations about it right now.
Good, thank you. Let's see, we'll flip back to e-commerce. Question, the hybrid AMP component patterns shown during the e-commerce talks are great. Do these companies plan on sharing these in future patterns for e-commerce? So I think you can answer that on behalf of those companies or more broadly in terms of guidance and examples for e-commerce sites to follow.
So I'm not entirely sure what the hybrid components are referring to. If it is just the combination of different components that sites are using to achieve certain features, I think that we are trying to spotlight more of the implementations that sites have. So we recently launched AMP Spotlight, which shows some really cool implementations that different sites have in different verticals. So you can check it out, look at their source code, and see an example of how to implement a feature. And we're trying to do that more and more, especially in e-commerce, because building some of these experiences, if somebody else has figured it out, likely you can leverage that, and we hope to help you do that.
Yeah, and I think we also got some good examples of the thought process that goes into deciding which pages to do in what order and how to prioritize them. So hopefully we can, we'll have those presentations, obviously, and share more about that. Let's see. Is there? So this one hasn't. This is another ad roadmap question. Is there a roadmap when pre, mid, post rolls will be available in AMP videos? Because we still have to work around to commercial. We still have to have workarounds to commercialize our videos in AMP.
It's launched. So,
So
the AMP IMA video component that I briefly talked about essentially allows you to serve pre, post, and mid-roll video ads, and ships with a video player as well. So it's really straightforward to start to monetize your video content with ads from, for example, Google, but other places too.
good pre-cached answer. Awesome.
Pre-rendering
Okay.
it.
Let's see. A question for AdZerk. How do you track impressions and visibility without JavaScript?
Yeah, so with impressions, you use the AMP pixel, right? So you can pass down any pixel that a advertiser wants to load with an AMP pixel, and then the same with AMP analytics. This is similar like the in-person question. If the advertiser has a moat tag, what we can do is we just put that moat tag as a value that comes back in the JSON, and then in the template we can have AMP analytics, and you can load that moat tag into the AMP analytics, and it works just like it would normally. So really anything that a buyer wants to be able to track, they can do with that.
I guess just to clarify, we're not saying no JavaScript. We're just saying no arbitrary JavaScript. As long as we know the JavaScript that's inside the AMP project, and we know it because we merged it, we think it's pretty performant, it's fine. But what we generally have a problem with is with arbitrary JavaScript, which can do whatever it wants.
How do we deal with? I think we've kind of addressed this with third-party analytics scripts and tag containers in AMP. How to make marketing teams happy? So I think this is another question. Again, if answered, we can indicate that about these sort of third-party tracking, both analytics and ads.
So we do support a lot of the third-party analytics tools that are available. So I think Adobe Analytics is an example of that, where they have an AMP integration with AMP Analytics that you can use. If you are using an analytics platform that is not currently supported by AMP, please file an issue with us. Please let your analytics platform know that you are building AMP pages and you would like to use their tools. It's really up to them to sort of build the AMP integration. Of course, we are happy to help with that process, but putting pressure both on them and on us can help that process move along.
Yeah, and I might actually, sort of add on to that with another question for you guys. I hear, you probably hear from time to time from ad tech companies or other vendors in the ecosystem who want to participate in AMP, or from publishers who wish their third-party vendors were AMP enabled. Do you have any advice or guidance how do you answer those questions when they come to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely letting us know so that we can work with them helps. I think that, but also letting them know, right, that you're building AMP pages and it's a priority for you is really important. And I think a good example of that is that, with Magento, the community was really active. So that Magento is a CMS tool for e-commerce, and the community was really active in saying that, AMP pages are important to us. We're seeing that they're good for users. We're seeing that they're good for revenue. Give us a way to build them, right? And you can see that there were some third-party plugins that were built already. Members of the community were trying to figure out ways that they could build it out. And eventually the Magento team, became very aware of these concerns, and they've started to really expand their AMP support and work with us to build out a tool that makes it easy for their customers to build AMP pages. So I think both letting us know and both letting that, whatever third-party vendor that is, let them know that it's important to you are both good steps in getting it done.
I just want to add that, especially if it's just, I'm going to talk from an ads perspective, if it's just serving regular ads onto AMP pages, 99% of the cases things should just work. And we're trying to sort of remove this confusion by documenting better. But in the AMP HTML ads case, yes, we have a ton of documentation online. It's literally somebody just needs to spend a little bit of time going in there and checking it out. But as Lisa mentioned, we're happy to sort of coordinate that entire process and making the process easy. So feedback welcome. Good,
thank you. I'll remind anyone, microphones up there, if anyone else has any questions for the panel. I will, here's one from me. So we talk, we talk often about achieving parity between an AMP experience and a non-AMP experience, and our efforts to sort of either reproduce or approximate capabilities that we have in a non-AMP experience in AMP. I would ask, are there any cases where you maybe perhaps have chosen not to reproduce in AMP something that existed in a standard format, or where you have implemented something with AMP and then taken that experience or that implementation back to a non-AMP environment?
Yeah, so for us, in direct advertising, so when we have a direct relationship with an agency, there can be some difficulties with executing some of the formats that they provide us with within an AMP environment. Equally, some of the technologies that we use within our own web pages, such as our data management platform, don't work that great with an AMP. However, with the developments that we've seen with GWD today, we're looking to try and improve that. As well, we're also in open communications with these technologies now with the changes that we're seeing via RTC. We now there's more leg room for us to essentially experiment with making more calls. So there are problems that we're looking to solve in like the next year, but those are the main differences with mobile web and AMP. And then with respect to from like a revenue perspective, the stuff that I was speaking about today has actually helped a lot to help us make parity with respect to the revenue per page. So if we look at it from a programmatic only perspective, so if we exclude direct, and we can also include affiliate in this, for the past 2 months, we've actually had a higher revenue per page for just programmatic in AMP than we did in web, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
But that doesn't include direct, and direct is a bit of an issue for us to solve via the tools that have been discussed today.
I can briefly mention one of the things that is on the regular web, and that doesn't sort of, we learned from what went wrong in the regular web was header bidding. For example, in the regular web, with header bidding, there's a non-blocking call to some third party before the actual ad server gets called. And we learned that that's just not reasonable, right? We want to make sure the ad experience is great, and also the page itself is great from a user experience standpoint. So we ensured that when we built the RTC framework, that every single RTC callout needs to come back within 500 milliseconds, and if it doesn't, it just basically goes ahead and makes the ad server call anyway. So it's kind of putting the pressure on the ecosystem to sort of raise the bar and start to become better about how quickly they start to respond to these RTC callouts.
That's good. Anyone else want to answer that one? No? Good. Let's see. A question for Airbnb. The question is pretty succinct. The audience question is, was it worth it? I'll expand on that a little bit. I think you gave us a great sense of how you have sort of kind of triangulated around figuring out how and where to implement AMP. What's your plan going forward?
Is it worth it? It's a pretty good question. Yeah, I think for me, I believe that AMP is worth it. I mean, the biggest, or the memory that stands out the most about AMP was that I think the first time that we launched AMP to 10 cities. I think it was like Mountain View, San Francisco, New York. And I remember going to like our PM meeting and showing our VP of engineering, hey, like here's AMP, here it is live. I remember like he clicked on it, it loaded instantly, and he freaked out. He literally spent the next hour walking around the office, showing anybody that he saw, hey, check this out. Like, look, if I Google Airbnb Berlin and hit this Berlin page, it loads instantly. So on that end, like, just being able to see somebody like hit our page and instantly load it, I think like it was 100% worth it to be able to like access our website instantly. So on the end, yeah, it was definitely worth like all the work that we put in, and I think it's worth all the future work that we're going to put in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Great. And I think to your point and to the earlier question about how do you convince stakeholders, I think that for many of us, myself included, the best thing you can do is show them the phone and show them how fast it loads. That is more effective than 100 PowerPoint slides. That is a really good note to almost tie this up. I think I'm going to probably ask one more question unless there's anything from the audience. I think the pre-bid stuff is going to be huge. Anyone who's been working with publishers and advertisers understands how much they wanted to have that in AMP. Are there any other big things that you guys would have in mind that you hear from customers that we have planned that you'd want to talk about that would help us? I think the goal is not just to get to parity, but to blow by parity.
Well, one of the issues that we've had over the past couple of months is that, as was discussed earlier in a question, we're doing essentially like an embed of our own player via the AMP iframe method, which means that we're running essentially a bit of a janky player that doesn't monetize as well because we're not making a proper call to the IMA SDK, and it doesn't have, without getting into the weeds too much, essentially it doesn't feel as well as using like a dedicated AMP element. So as soon as we push the code to enable pre-bid via RTC, then we're going to start focusing on other things like building out the dedicated AMP IMA video element. And also, once we normalize our code, there's a lot of developments both within the AMP ecosystem, such as RTC, and what are the other 5 things that you can now call, because at the minute we only call 1 remote point, now we're going to be able to call 5, so what are we going to do with those 4 other points? But then also things like there's actually a new framework for pre-bid, which also gives some new functionality. So then we can start to play about with that as we are within our own web environments. Outside of that, there's several other points that Vamsi mentioned, such as the refreshing of the ads and the fluid stuff, definitely all interesting. Probably going to do some multi-format stuff so that we've got the fluid stuff competing with the existing demand as well. But we're kind of a little bit parked at the minute because we want to normalize our code with the pre-bid via RTC, and then we can look to do all this other interesting stuff over the next few, next 6 months or so. And just finally, quickly, I did mention in my slide the changes that we've been working on with the AMP team for the changes in dynamic CSS classes component. That's also really interesting to us as well, because once we can have like geo-specific configs, and once other wrappers get on board and build out solutions for this, it means you can start to differentiate your global setup to potentially make even more money.
Awesome.
So for e-commerce, I think that we've mentioned the date picker a few times now. We were just really excited about it for travel. In general, I think that we have a lot of plans this year to better support payments and checkout. It's something that we're emphasizing. You know, we want to be able to give you all the tools you need to successfully collect payments from your customers. And so I don't have anything that I can publicly share right now, but it is something that we're prioritizing and that we're excited about for the future. And in general, I think that, you know, there's a lot of things that are happening in e-commerce that maybe we're not even quite aware of. So for example, the star rating, the difficulty that exists in implementing that at the very gradated level that AliExpress did, that was something that was kind of new to us. You know, we thought that the solution that we had in place would work fairly well, but as Michael mentioned, if you want, you know, 1,000 different degrees of difference there, it can be really difficult. And so that's something that we've now prioritized on our product roadmap, is giving first-class support to that. So as you see things that, you know, seem to be a little bit more difficult than you would like to build, let us know through issues on GitHub. It's something that we definitely take into account as we're building our product roadmap.
Anything else? All right. And we are perfectly on time. I want to thank everybody on the panel. Thank you for your great presentations. For everybody, we are at lunch hour. So please say lunch is in the same place as it was yesterday. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you back here in an hour.